Hello, my name is Raymond Karchevsky, and this is coming to you from my home here in Cave Junction, Oregon. Tonight I have an extensive interview with Bill Baggins of Mother Earth Radio regarding my ordeal with the Josephine County Sheriff's Office and court system. To all you sovereigns out there, you patriots, pay attention. I'm sure you'll find this interesting.
This is Bill Baggins, Mother Earth Radio on the Free Radio Network. My guest this evening is Ray Karchevsky, and he has a very interesting story he wants to tell about his fight to to maintain your sovereignty.
Right.
Or sovereignty.
One of them.
So how's that all work? Sovereign. In the Constitution, we've heard that we are sovereign citizens.
Well, our nation was founded on the issue of sovereignty, that the people were sovereign. And when we broke away from England under the rule of a monarch, we, who was sovereign, and all were subject to that sovereignty. When we broke away from England, we declared our independence, and that each man had unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. We were sovereign. So we created our own government to act as servants of the sovereign. Our government is not sovereign. It has limited sovereignty. The people are sovereign. That sovereignty is being assailed by our government today, where the public servants no longer see themselves as servants of the people. They see themselves as masters of the people. And our freedoms are being infringed upon. No. I, for one, cannot live under that kind of government. My case could be anybody's experience. I am a retired police sergeant from a small department in the Bay Area of California, near San Francisco. And I'm not very pleased with what I see today in law enforcement. The kind of law enforcement we have today would never be tolerated in my day. And I'm going back to 1960 to 1970, 1972, when I retired on a disability retirement. Law enforcement has changed to the point now where officers do not use judgment. They merely follow policy. And they follow policy blindly for fear of losing their jobs. Only injustice can arise from such behavior. My arrest was such an experience. I'm 66 years old presently. 2 weeks before my 65th birthday is when I was arrested. I was coming home on 199 to Cave Junction from Grants Pass area, and I had my high beams on, unknowingly, but nevertheless, there I was. I wasn't aware of it until I was stopped by a police car, a marked patrol vehicle of the Josephine County Sheriff's Department. The officer came to my window. I rolled it down partially, and he asked for my driver's license. Now, I advised the officer at the time that I was not subject to I was not required to have a driver's license. as I was not being engaged in any kind of commercial activity while traveling in my own private automobile, returning to my home. You see, these are one of the deceptions that have been perpetrated upon the American people by our public servants, who no longer serve the public, but serve their own private agendas.
How did you become aware of the fact that you even could do that, not produce a driver's license?
Well, there's a movement afoot regarding the redemption of one's sovereignty, and there are various books on the market, and I was introduced to such a book by a friend of mine here in Cave Junction, and I took the book home and read it. And it was a real eye-opener to me. As I told you, I was a retired police sergeant. But I must admit to you, Bill, that I was extremely ignorant of this level of the law. The law that is enforced by officers is not the same law that's practiced in the courts by lawyers. Boy, you walk into a den of vipers when you do that. A court of law is not a court of justice. That much I've learned in my experience. It has been a devastating experience and has taken its toll on my wife's health and on my health, too, for that matter, in these last 21 months. Now, on the evening that I was traveling home and stopped by the officer, having already read some of the information regarding sovereignty, I was somewhat prepared.
Could you, what's the name of that book?
The name of the book is Cracking the Code, 3rd edition. Now, that book is no longer on the market. The feds closed them down. Now, keep in mind that they closed them down and shut down the sale of the books, but they did not arrest anybody. So it's a matter of pressure by the federal government to shut down any kind of information that might allow people to exercise their sovereignty.
Who wrote the book?
Well, there are a number of people. No one has given their true name for the same reasons I just outlined to you, that they're in danger of some sort of retaliation, from the authorities, and so that some may call it underground. It's not quite an underground book, but be that as it may, it's no longer available to the public. Now, there might be some copies of it on the internet, but the price would be quite a bit. It's an amazing book. It goes into the history of the legal system, how it unfolded, how it manifested into its present day from the time of Babylon, time of Jesus, and through the ages until common law, English common law, and to the present day. And it traces the history of the legal profession, the lawyers, the Bar Association, and its origins. And it indicates, it exposes, if you will, the corruptness, of the human spirit when you step into a court of law where people are conditioned to look at it as being a place of justice, a place where they will be heard. Nothing could be further from the truth. It is a point of exploitation. It is a place of extrapolating or taking wealth from a person. You see, we as individuals, as sovereign people, are the only producers of wealth. And it is the legal profession that is the juristic profession which exploits that wealth and which redistributes the wealth, that and the bankers. And we become producers of wealth, but we don't enjoy the wealth ourselves. In other words, we're slaves. We don't know that, though. We call ourselves different things. But the action, of our lives, of going to work, and from morning till night, or holding down 2 jobs just to make ends meet, because the cost of living always outstrips the cost of earning a living. And so and the manipulation of the currencies, of the monies, always outstrips your ability to earn. Therefore, we are slaves. We think we're free, and that's the biggest illusion there is in America today, because we're not free at all. We just don't call ourselves slaves. But slaves we are. Now we go back. I'm getting away from the night of the arrest, because I think there needs to be some background on this. But how we become regarded as security instruments for the debt, of the United States, the corporate United States of America. Not the constitutional United States of America, but the corporate state. We become known as security instruments. In other words, we can be traded upon by our labor. Go ahead.
That brings up a point in my mind is, from what I understand, the framers of the Constitution were really down on corporations, and they were supposed to be established for a very specific purpose for a very limited time, and then they would be dissolved. And something happened in our history that corporations became actual citizens. And
right. Greed.
Yeah. But right. But in the original intent of the founding fathers, they were very wary of corporations.
Well, nothing has really changed in our country from England. We think we're different, but we're still tenants. We don't own our land. Our land is owned by the government. Otherwise, why are we paying taxes? We're like tenants for landholders. And so we call it something different, but nothing really, in essence, has changed. And that's... The American law is based on the English system. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The same fundamental momentum of law in England continues here in America today. The Bar Association that we hear so much of is born of the British Accredited Registry, which was originated in London, England. And it has branches all over the world, and they call themselves bar associations. But the Bar Association in England, or the Crown, has the copyright on English law. And we follow English law. Therefore, they own the law.
We're still subjects to the Crown.
Absolutely. Only
and that's what people don't understand.
Oh, they can't possibly, because the whole facade would come tumbling down. And people who are in power would be questioned regarding that power, and they could not give the answers that are required. The whole system would come tumbling down. Now that's what's at stake here with the New World Order. They're trying to consolidate their power into a centralized banking system, and there are two truisms that govern human society. Those who hold the gold make the rules, and those who make the rules win the game. Now, between the bankers and the lawyers, the legal system, you have the control of civilized populations. Of course, that's offset by religious organizations which operate by myth and mythologies. Now, going back to ancient times, the two basic ways of controlling human societies and human behavior is through the warrior, which is the armies, the police forces, the coercive agencies that use force of arms in order to control through force and fear, and you have religions who control people through superstitions, through myth, and through mythology, mysticism. And so you have the two basic, it goes back to ancient times, where you have the warrior and the witch doctor. The witch doctor are organized religions, and the warriors are government. Now that's a fundamental, indisputable fact. Now we can argue that, but arguing is counterproductive to understanding. It leads to endless debate that goes nowhere. And that's how people are controlled also. If you'll notice, our legal system is based on such debate. That goes nowhere. Because when they finally make their vote, you find more often than not that the vote has nothing to do with the results of the debate. Those who have the power make the rule. Now, when people begin to see that that's how simple power is in this world, they can awaken to their own power, and they can bypass that by you see, there's a lot of talk about revolution today. That we're heading toward martial law. We're heading toward perhaps a bloody revolution, and we may, in fact, be doing that. I have been writing on the internet now for years. The solution to our problems is not revolution or resisting evil, but to boycott it. Now, I perceive the legal system to be evil to the nth degree. It has a very potent PR program going for it to keep their image in a positive nature. But behind that, you see the darkest of human behavior exhibited, where people can be stripped away of their freedom, stripped of their money, their property, and their very lives. There's nothing positive about that. And they do it with words. They call a person a criminal. But what is a criminal? Is a criminal something that can be just changed with a word? At the age of 65, prior to that traffic stop, I had not had a blemish on my record in my entire life. No record whatsoever. That night, I was turned into a felon, just because some cop said, if you leave this traffic stop. Now, I asked the cop, after all the preliminaries were finished, whether I was under arrest for the high beams on. And of course, I didn't have a driver's license, and I openly told him I wasn't required to have that. Well, he had asked also for my registration information, which I did have, and I had told him at the time that my name was copyrighted, common law copyrighted, and that the use for such, the unauthorized use for such property in their prosecution of me, that there would be an agreement on his part that he would compensate me for the use of my property in the amount of $500,000. Well, he thought that was a joke.
Now, where's that number come from?
It's a standard. It's a standard being used presently with regards to people, who are using the redemption argument.
Like a copyright violation, that's a standard.
Yeah.
A standard penalty or fee, or
Well, it's not a penalty. You see, the whole it isn't a confrontational arrangement. It's a contract. You see, if I contract with you to use your property, common law says that one must be compensated for the use of one's property. Well, one's name is one's property. We are not our names. See, we are living, breathing, flesh and blood human beings, and we have many names. You see, my children call me Dad. My wife calls me Honey from time to time, and her off on that honey bun. She'll love hearing that one. At any rate, these are just names. There's something to grab your attention. It's an appellation. You're calling for one's attention. That's what a name is. But we are not our names. Therefore, when you agree to be the name, they can prosecute you. You see. When one is born, when a child is born, at the moment of the hospitalization, the personnel come into the room to have the mother sign on the dotted line regarding the certification, the birth certification of the name. The juristic person is born. The juristic person is a legal fiction created by the legal system. And it is the name that is spelled in all capital letters. In English usage, it is not proper to spell one's name in all capital letters, but in the legal system, it has direct significance. That signifies a juristic person. Now, a juristic person is a legal fiction. Now, the courts are a legal fiction. All courts are legal fictions. They are not real. They are fictions per se, and they only have jurisdiction over other legal fictions. They do not have jurisdiction over living, breathing, flesh and blood, sentient, natural men and women. You see, the living, breathing, you and I, Bill. And your name may be other than Bill, for all I know, but it doesn't matter. I'm still talking to you, and you're talking to me, and we're two living, breathing, flesh and blood entities that are communicating. That's the point. The courts have no jurisdiction over those individuals, over those people, unless one has not changed their legal status. So now, when the juristic person is born by virtue of the birth certificate, the living, breathing, flesh and blood entity, which is still an infant at that point, is deemed to be, as it grows through life, is deemed to be a surety for the debts of the juristic person, which is the debtor. Now, all juristic persons are considered debtors by law. And the governments have limited sovereignty, therefore they declare themselves to be creditors over such debtors. And so that's how the emergence of a ward of a court comes into being, the ward of the state. A ward is a child, looked at as a child, as incapable of handling their own legal affairs. And therefore, they need guidance, they need advice, and that's where lawyers come in. That's where doctors come in. That's where all these expert professionals come in, and they exploit that relationship. They make a great deal of money from those relationships because people are considered not to be able to care for themselves, to take care of their own affairs. Now, once you're at that level, see, as a ward of the state owns you. You are their resource. You are their creditor, or you are their debtor, and they are the creditor. Now, every person, now, I use the word person because it has multiple definitions. There is a legal person, which is the juristic person I speak of, and the living, breathing, flesh and blood, natural man, is also a person, but I'm not comfortable using that word person when talking about the living, breathing, flesh and blood person, or individual, because it gets confused.
So what word would you use?
Well, man or woman, a natural man or woman, as opposed to a fictitious person. You see, the whole power of the legal system is in words, in the manipulation of words. And the legal system has their own vocabulary. It has their own linguistic system that is a well-known secret kept from the average person. You have your normal English and you have your legalese. And never the twain shall meet.
That's why you need a lawyer to translate.
Absolutely. But once you get a lawyer, you give jurisdiction to the courts.
Because you're entering into contract with the lawyer?
Absolutely.
And the lawyer is an agent of the court?
He's an officer of the court.
An officer of the court.
Right.
And that has to do with the bar.
The Bar Association,
which
precisely.
goes back to England.
It is tied to England, but not directly. And we must not fall into the error of jumping to conclusions. But if you trace it back far enough, you see that in fact is what is going on. We are still ruled by England, even though we think we're not. Now, on this night of the arrest, let's get back to that. After I had told the officer that my name was copyrighted by common law and there was a user fee involved in the voluntary use of that, and he threatened me with arrest if I did not produce the papers. Well, you see, at that point, he entered into a contract with me and agreed to compensating me by his action, by an implied consent. After being advised, I made the offer, if you use my name, you will compensate me for the amount of $500,000. He thought it was a joke. I was not joking. And when he threatened me with arrest, I gave him the papers, and that consummated the contract. Now, at that point, I became the creditor and he became the debtor. Now, he began to write up the citation, which I ultimately refused to accept. It did not attach to me. And he attempted to confiscate the car, my automobile. And I had told him that if he were to impound the automobile, he'd have to arrest me. I was 25 miles away from my home in Cave Junction. It's a little after midnight. And I was not going to allow him to take my car. Now, this may seem humorous, but there's no humor involved. You see, there's no what's the word I'm looking for? There's no mistake when police automobiles are called cruisers. They cruise in a maritime sea of highways, looking for booty, for the master. They're not much different than pirates of the old days. That's how they function in these traffic stops. They are agents of the corporation, and they have jurisdiction over individuals who are voters, who have bank accounts, who receive mail at their home. All these tie the sovereign person to the system, and they become subject to the system, and therefore subject to the laws of the system, which are the legislative laws of the corporation.
You say that because if you're a voter or you own property, or you're entering into contract with.
Absolutely. When you vote, you're in agreement that you have control over those who you put into office to represent you. That's a dead bang contract, isn't it?
So when they don't do the wishes of the voters, which is kind of nebulous, who's wishing what, they're in violation of the contract, the public servants in office?
That's a fine point. I don't know that I'm capable or competent to answer. You see, all organizations, the United States of America, the corporation, when you become a 14th Amendment citizen,
which is, we better explain the 14th Amendment.
Well, the 14th Amendment came into being after the Civil War, and Lincoln had sought to free the slaves. What in fact he did was create the level of slavery, making all people subject to the rules of the corporate United States, which was not the same as the original de jure constitutional United States of America. It's these words, United States and United States of America, based on whether they're capitalized or lowercased, all these things have significance in the court of law, and they're missed by the average person, but they're deadly in the court of law. And so when you speak of things such as the United States and United States of America, there's confusion is rampant among people who really can't pay attention to the subtlety of it. And that's where the courts have jurisdiction. The lawyers rule over such confusion. See, I perceive that the lawyers, and the judges for that matter, are descendants, if you will, of the Pharisees in the time of Jesus of Nazareth. The Pharisees were nothing more than the judges of today, the black-robed people who walked around and needed a great deal of PR images, positive images, to sustain their unholy deeds. Who have the power to put people in jail, to commit them to mental hospitals, to strip away their wealth, strip away their property, and time strip away their life. Now that's a heady kind of power. And Jesus exposed that in his time. That's why they strung him up, you see. Now, the very people who killed him then turned around and made a religion about him. And a great deal of mind control went into being, into creating that religious entity called Christianity. Now, Jesus was a simple man. Jesus was a man of truth. And he was a simple carpenter. But that truth that he lived was so dangerous to the deception of those in power that they had to get rid of him, and they had to make an example of him to others to not follow that truthfulness. Now, that's the greatest danger that the legal profession faces, is some simple man of truth standing before the bar and challenging them to prove their authority, their jurisdiction. Now, that was the essence of my case. I stood before the court not as a professional lawyer. I'm not at all. But I am a man of truth, and I am a simple man. And in that simplicity, the courts could not handle. That's been 21 months now, and the courts have not answered any of my questions. They have not answered any of the motions that I filed with the court. They have not answered any of the proofs of claim that I submitted to the district attorney, because if he answered those questions, I would have been set scot-free on the spot. And so they could not afford to answer the questions. I had demanded that they produce anyone who had a claim against me, claiming to be a victim of my behavior, my actions. They have not been able to do that. Now, in common law, without a victim, there is no crime, you see. In administrative law, which is the kind of law that Americans live under today without knowing that that is what they are doing, legislation apply. They're the rules of the game. They're the rules of the group that you belong to, and everybody who agrees to be a member of that group, thereby agrees to abide by all the rules. That's the nature of all organizations. And if you don't abide by the rules, you're not a member of the corporation. But you see, a member who is not, or a person who is not a member of the corporation is not required to follow the rules of the corporation. You see, if I'm not working for Pepsi-Cola or Coca-Cola, you see, I don't have to follow Coca-Cola's policy. If I'm not a member of Josephine County political system, the body politic, I don't have to follow the rules, that are set forth to the subjects of those rules. Now that's the whole nature of jurisdiction. That's the question that the courts refuse to answer. By law, when jurisdiction is challenged, as it was in my case, all procedures must come to a halt until jurisdiction is proven before any further proceedings may take place. Now, Josephine County does not follow the law. They have not followed the law, and I must confess, I don't see them following the law in the future unless something is done about it. We must awaken the taxpayers here of Josephine County and other parts of Oregon and other parts of our country to the real judicial system that we face. The average person hasn't got a clue of the judicial system unless they're swept up by it. And then when that happens, you're labeled a criminal and you're immediately discredited. And therefore, the mind control experts come into being, and they're going to start a program of diminishing your reputation, of attacking your reputation, your credibility. And they do that very well. Anybody who is on the internet can attest to that. All they've got to do is look at the news groups and the forums, and you see that kind of mind control going. It's just rampant. Now,
can we get back to the jurisdiction issue?
Sure.
Now, when they first stopped you, could you get back to that when you left the scene of the?
Okay. Well, during the course of the traffic stop, which went on for about 20-25 minutes, and he was writing up the citation and doing the impound report, for the car. And I had asked him, at least on 4 occasions, if I were under arrest, since traffic violations are infractions. They are not considered crimes, and they are not arrestable offenses. And therefore, he told me, in response to my 4 questions, if I was under arrest, he told me 4 times I was not. After the 4th time, I said, well, then I'm leaving. And I got in the car. And as I was going to the car, he said, if you leave, I'm going to arrest you for felony eluding an officer. Felony eluding an officer. Felony. Now, that's serious stuff. I got into the car, started it up, and I proceeded at a speed of about 10 to 15 miles an hour for about 150 yards, watching my rearview mirror all the time. And the lights came flashing by, and the cover cars' lights were flashing by, and so I pulled over immediately, 150 yards. That's it. That's the entire eluding charge that.
So you pulled over because the lights were flashing?
Yeah, I knew that
was part of the, that's part of the rules. When the lights flash, you pull over.
That's right. Well, when I drove off, I watched to see whether they were going to proceed any further, because the fact was, I was not under arrest, and if the man had any sense at all, he'd have cut me loose. He had my name, he had my address. He could have gone to the district attorney and sought a warrant for my arrest and come after me at that point on full legal grounds. But he chose not to do so. So when the lights came on, I knew that they were going to proceed further. So I pulled over, shut the car engine off, and to the shouts of, get out of the car with your hands up, and so I got out of the car, and everybody had their guns out, pointing at me. One of the officers had a laser beam pointing in my eyes and my forehead. And it was an interesting time, I must admit, Bill, because I was probably the calmest person there. And they were shouting commands, and you've seen it on TV. You've seen it on cops. You know, they're bonkers.
By this time, there was backup.
The backup was already there. There were 2 cars there altogether, and there were 4 people, four officers altogether. So they cuffed me and took me to jail. Now that's the beginning of it, and from that. They put me into a cell. I was in a cell that could only be described as a torture chamber. It had a commode, a sink, and a platform, a cement platform about maybe 2.5 feet off the ground, off the floor, off the cement floor, which was cement, and the dimensions of probably 2 feet width by perhaps 4 feet in length. You couldn't lay down. You couldn't sleep. There was no cot, no bed, no blankets, no nothing, and there was cold air being pumped in to the cell, and they stripped me of all my clothes. I was in my underwear. I guess I had my trousers on, but I was in a t-shirt. But it was cold. And I was suffering from hypothermia during the night, and I asked for a blanket. They refused. I asked for the sweater that I came in with. They refused. And near the morning, I asked an officer, a female officer, one of the deputies, if all the cells were like mine, because it was an extraordinary cell. It forced you to sit up. For 33 hours you had to sit up, or else try and lay on the floor and get some sleep, but you couldn't do that because the floor was so cold. And she said no, that it was not. I said, well, how many cells are like mine? He says, only one. He says, you mean, then why am I in there? And she said that it's because you refused to cooperate in filling out the booking procedures. Well, you see, they put me in that cell even before then. So there was something, there was a red flag that was waved, that why was I put in that particular cell when the reason they gave was that I refused to cooperate, and it never came to that even question, that I refused to cooperate.
Well, at the time of your stop, you were...
Well, I submitted to the arrest. I didn't resist them at all, and, in fact, I think perhaps my demeanor had a calming effect on the officers, because they were bonkers. And I've been around cops long enough, in my experience, that cops are dangerous people with guns. They freak out. And I could tell you some more stories, but time doesn't permit that. But, yeah.
So, I think I'm interested in you refusing to establish a contract with the corporation, with the county.
Well, I had gone
maintaining your sovereignty.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. You see, when I appeared before the judge, I had presented him with a written communication and a security agreement, which is a contract, which is in writing the same kind of agreement I made orally with the officer, that if they chose to use my copyrighted private property and my common law copyrighted property, they would, in essence, assent to compensating me for it. And I presented that to Judge Alan Kuhn, who was presiding over the arraignments. When my name was called, this goes back on the 12th of September 2001, a week after I was arrested and released to come to court. He called my name, and the procedure normally is that when your name is called, you pass the bar, you go beyond the bar, the barrier between the spectator and the court. Now, that's symbolic of giving jurisdiction. when you pass that bar, you voluntarily submit yourself to the jurisdiction of the court. Well, I refused to do that, and I stayed in the spectator section while he asked me to come forward. I said, well, talk from here. And my wife was with me, and some friends were with me. And he said, well, I can't hear you too well. And I said, well, you'll have to. And if you please, I'll give the bailiff something that I wish you to look at. And so I gave him the security agreement, and he gave it to the judge. The judge looked at it, and he had kind of a strange look on his face. He was a little perturbed by what he saw. And he asked me if I was Raymond Karchevsky, the name of the defendant, and I had told him that name was a copyrighted private trademark trade name of mine, and I was the copyright holder. And then, who are you?
Is that what you wrote on the note that you handed him, to the same effect?
No. It was a legal contract that quite complicated, but he was sufficiently aware of what it was. But he says, "Are you the defendant?" And I says, "No, I'm not the defendant. The defendant was a juristic person, and I'm not that juristic person. So I'm not, and I was not a surety, or in other words, a guarantor for the debts of the juristic person, and therefore I would not admit to it, and therefore give them jurisdiction." You see, it's a trick. It's a trick. You see, if you're looking at a piece of paper, and your name is spelled in all capital letters, and my signature is spelled in capital letters and lowercase letters, which is the name of the Christian name given at birth, they're not the same, you see. In English language, all capital letters is not proper English, but it serves the purpose for the legal profession in creating this juristic person. So when somebody asks you orally, "Are you so-and-so?" Well, orally, both names sound alike, and that's where the confusion arises. So if they ask you your name, looking at the complaint, which is in all capital letters, and you say, "Yes, I am," you complete the contract, don't you?
Yeah, you enter into agreement with them.
That's right. And when you do that, you give them jurisdiction.
So you have to say your name, lowercase, uppercase, lowercase, to make the distinction?
That's one way of doing it, yeah. That's one way of doing it. But that's, you see, that I did that during one of my arraignments, and it carried no, it didn't mean a thing to the judge. They were going to keep me in jail no matter what. So they don't follow the rules here in Josephine County. They make the rules as they go along. Now, I've been to the governor's office. I've been to the Attorney General's office, to the Secretary of State's office, to the Committee for Judicial Review, for the conduct of judges. I've gone as far as the Treasury Department in Washington, D.C., to hold these people accountable, and there's no relief anywhere. No relief anywhere. The average person is just worn out, running around, and they don't, it means nothing. They don't follow the law. Now that's the problem. That's what we're facing today. We're facing a system that does not follow the law, but calls itself the law. And it's not a very good thing, Bill. I mean, we're heading for some real trouble because of this kind of deception. Now, either the people are sovereign, and the government are the servants of the people, or they're not. If the government is the master of the people, we're no longer living in a Republican, well, I'm blocking out on the name, but We're no longer living in the Constitution.
In a republic.
That's right.
In a constitutional republic.
There you have it. There you have it. That's the problem. You see, our system has changed so subtly over a long period of time in conditioning. And our education system, who educates our children, have changed the words, have changed the system, and so we've become a communist nation. Only we don't think so, because our words, we don't use the word communism. But you see, if you look at the communist planks, this country is living them.
Well, don't they have a constitution too, don't they?
Well, all organizations have their own rules.
Bylaws.
Exactly. But my main concern, Bill, is that the average person is kept in the dark to the point that they're frightened, because they don't know what to do when they're brought before the bar, the court. And it is it's a tough place to be, because you're playing by their rules, and their rules are corrupt, and they don't follow their own rules. If they followed them, you'd have an even chance of doing something about it. Even though you don't have the power going in, you have the power of law behind you. But you don't have that in this country now. It's all a bunch of words.
So you have to be very careful about not establishing a contract, not becoming under their jurisdiction, like crossing the bar or any number of subtle things, you might, like you say, tricks to trap you into giving your consent.
The legal profession is full of tricks. You know, you hear the word shyster a lot. See, people love to judge, but they don't do anything about it other than complain. And that's how the justice system can continue in its corrupt state. They don't mind if you call them names. Names don't hurt them, you see. When they have you before them and they make the rules as they go along, and they won't even let you talk. They won't let you express yourself in defense of yourself. That's how rigid they are in controlling you when you stand before the court. There is no justice. There is no fairness involved. I mean, you are being processed, being on a fast track toward being convicted, and therefore being fined and creating revenue for the state. It's all revenue. It's all commercial. All these actions before the court are commercial activities. See, that's why they're monitored by the Treasury Department. You know, and they have to follow the rules of the Treasury Department because they're a commercial activity. The judge, the word bench, which is in court, nothing. It derived from the word bank, and the judge is really a banker. He's a banker for the corporation. The average person doesn't know that. The average person believes that there's a system of justice, and the judge is a referee who will see that justice is being done. The judge is there to process you. And they have a part of the action that goes into their retirement funds, as it does into the police departments, the court stenographers, all of the public officials that derive their livelihood they derive it from the prosecution of people brought before the court. Now, part of the reason why the whole thing is unlawful is that our courts today are not constitutional Article III courts. In other words, they're not non-profit organizations. Here in Oregon, back in the mid-1990s, the state of Oregon sought to pool all of the public employees' retirement system pension funds for the police departments, the state police, the stenographers, the bailiffs, etc., etc., and pull them in and invest them into the private stock market. Now, in that move, they lost their non-profit status and their Article 3 status by the Constitution, and they became a for-profit private corporation. And so the judge you go before today is operating at that level. He's nothing more than a corporate officer.
That's in the state of Oregon.
That's all over. All over.
I mean, the California judges, they entered. Well,
all over.
I mean, every state. In the same year?
No.
Over a period of time.
That's right. They've all done it at their own time, at their own level, but they're all operating as administrative courts, and none of them are administrative courts, constitutional Article 3 courts.
Now, that's Article 3 of the
Constitution, yes. You see, that's why the Constitution has no bearing in their courts. You see, an administrative court is like a maritime court, like a captain of the ship. He's the law. He makes the law as he goes along, and you're bound by it. And so you have no rights in an administrative court, but you do have rights in a constitutional court or a common law court. And that was my stance. I did not give up my right to be heard in a constitutional Article 3 court in common law, in a trial by jury. Not a jury trial, but a trial by jury. There's a difference. These phrases are deadly, and this is how the legal profession just exploits people and just strips away their life's blood, their wealth. You see, we are the only producers of wealth, and the courts are manipulators or managers of wealth, and they found a way to skim the wealth. There's how your redistribution of wealth comes about.
You're getting a piece of the action.
That's right, exactly.
So, could you go on to exactly? Okay, you were charged with a infraction and a felony.
Well, the citation itself are infractions. The felony was my leaving as I did when the officer said, "I will charge you with the felony eluding if you drive away." Now, that's as simple as it is. You see, now, if a person is arresting you under unlawful grounds, you have a right not to submit. You have a right not to submit. I reserved that right, and I exercised that right. Now, out of that came this phony charge of eluding an officer. Now, from 65 years of never having a blemish, there was my first felony. Then when I filed my Uniform Commercial Code liens on the very officials that were instrumental in my arrest and prosecution, which included the judge and other judges and the district attorney and the officer, then rather than deal with that, the district attorney would not respond to any of my questions regarding proof of jurisdiction. Instead, he submitted the case to the Attorney General's office in Salem, Oregon, for prosecution of paper terrorism, to nail me as a paper terrorist. And the term is simulation of legal process.
This is after 9/11.
Oh yeah, all this is.
So was that paper terrorism? Was that a new thing in effect after 9/11?
Yeah, right. It arose from the Patriot Act. You see, they're using that Patriot Act to take away our rights, to take away our freedoms, and they're using. It's
obvious to me. Yeah.
Well, it's obvious to a whole lot of people, but what are they doing about it? You understand? You can look at it and you can complain and you can talk, but what are you doing about it? See, my approach to the legal profession is not to resist them, not to fight them, not to revolt against them, but to boycott them. See, my stance for the court of prove jurisdiction or cut me loose, and I had gone on a extended fast, a hunger strike, if you will.
Was there a reason for that?
Well, in protest of the unlawful arrest, to bring attention to it.
It didn't have anything to do with if you accepted food from them, you'd be entering a contract or anything like that.
No. It was merely to grab the attention of the public and say, these people are operating unlawfully. What are you going to do about it? I'm willing to stand up and not take any food. Now, that went on for 33 days before I was released on that. Now, for 27 of those 33 days, the Sheriff's Department here in Josephine County kept it a secret. Now, the Grants Pass Courier, the major newspaper here for the area, had called the jail and was told by the sergeant in command at the time that it was a hoax, that there was no hunger strike going on, even though it was in its 27th day. They kept a lid on it, and they're hoping that if people don't know about it, they won't do anything about it. You see, well, when they realized that I was going to continue, that I wasn't going to cave in, then they had to admit that there was. Now, surprisingly, here's an anecdote to that. Some of the prisoners had advised me that they observed, the sheriff's office was saying, I'm eating my food, you see, when I was not. And some of the inmates had advised me that they observed the deputies eating my food, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Were you in isolation at this time?
In 128 days, I spent 121 days in maximum security, isolation, single cell, 23-hour lockdown. I was given an hour for a shower and phone calls, and that was it. Otherwise, I was in solitary confinement. For a high beam violation, in essence. Now, how can something be taken out of, stretched to such proportions that you have this kind of thing over a high beam violation? You understand? The real issue is this thing of sovereignty, of being able to maintain your unalienable right to travel without asking permission from your public servants, to use the public roadways, which are owned by the people, not by the government. Understand? You see, the whole thing is crazy. It's all backwards. And yet the people don't question that. They've been so dulled down by their conditioning that they are afraid to ask these questions. And they have given up their rights in doing so.
Now, you were in prison or in jail before you went to court, or was this after you were sentenced that you were doing these 33 days in jail? Was that before you went to court or after?
Well, I was released. I was released after 33 hours in the holding cell. My wife was ill, and I was told that if I would not see the judge for another 2 weeks. And so I signed the release form under protest, under coercion.
So that's like entering in a contract again, right?
Under coercion. Therefore, there's no contract if it's done under coercion. And
they wouldn't let you out unless you signed.
That's right. Well, that's the first point. Then, of course, you'll find this interesting. When I went to the arraignment before Judge Kuhn and gave him the security agreement, and he asked me if I was the defendant, and I told him that I was not. He says, well, if you're not the defendant, I'm going to swear out a warrant for the defendant, And at that point, he adjourned the court, and he walked out rather hurriedly. And so my wife and I and my friends had gone to the water fountain on the second floor of the courthouse. We were standing there talking. And probably within 10 minutes or so, these sheriff's deputies walk up and said, Mr. Karchevsky, you're under arrest. They went right up to me. I said, well, let me see the warrant, because if they showed me the warrant, I would indicate that's not me, because that's assigned to the juristic person.
The capital letters?
That's right. And you see, but they wouldn't show me the warrant. They immediately handcuffed me and took me away. Now that began the first stint in jail.
So 2 weeks later, after your arrest.
A week later.
A week later. After your arrest, okay.
And then I was in for 33 days, and that was the 33rd day of the hunger strike. That they wanted to get me out, but I refused to be released unless they dropped all charges and made amends for what they did. And they, of course, had to save face. They refused to do so.
So you were being held without being convicted of anything.
Right. I was a kidnapped victim. I was kidnapped by private agents of the corporation, not legitimate police, but corporate officers, of Josephine County, like mercenaries, like the mercenaries that are being hired to go to Iraq today and fight a war. You see, they're not legitimate. They're private agents of a corporation that I don't belong to. And somehow or another, they consider me to be the enemy.
So I want to make this clear that you were being held without being convicted of any crime for 33 days. How does that work?
Easy.
I mean, some people, if they post bail, you get out on OR or whatever. Either you post bail, or you get out on OR.
Yeah.
But
I refused those. I refused them. I refused to be released on my own recognizance, because that would give them jurisdiction also. That would be the offer and acceptance of a contract. And without that jurisdiction, they have no legal or lawful grounds for holding me. I was held as a hostage for the crimes of the juristic person who I was not. And that's what they do. You see, they arrest the surety. If you look at an arrest warrant, there is the word surety on there, to bring forth the surety of the defendant. Now, you see, the surety is the living, breathing, flesh and blood person who agrees to accept the debts, or pay the debts for the juristic person. Because without that, the court has no jurisdiction over. They have jurisdiction over the juristic person, but he doesn't exist. It's a legal fiction. It's an idea. But as long as you find someone who's living, breathing, flesh and blood who says, I'll pay for that debt, you see, now they have control.
You say I'm the surety without even knowing it.
That's right.
You raise your hand.
You got it.
Right.
You got it. That's how everybody who's in jail today doesn't know that. Now, I sat during arraignments where these guys who've been around, know all they just played into the hands of the judges by just spilling their guts. They answered all the right questions, which gave the court jurisdiction, and they were done. But these guys they've been around. I mean, they've been in jail many times, but they haven't learned that simple lesson, you see.
Well, we're taught from a very early age, stand up, answer your name or whatever. So you do it. You fill out the form. You take the test and you sign it.
With dire consequences, I might add.
But that's the way schools. That's what school's all about.
That's what conditioning's all about. Exactly.
So you didn't do that.
No.
And so they took you away.
Yeah.
And you're in the prison. Solitary confinement for 33 days.
33 days, yep.
And then what happened?
Well, then I came before the trial. I was shaky. The effects of the hunger strike was taking effect in the 33rd day, and so I had to be assisted in coming to court by two deputies. I was shaky, but I still was functional in my mind, and I was able to address the court. And the court wanted to push me into a trial. I had no... They played games with the dates, you see, and they sprung this trial within 2 days. Gave me no time to prepare for it. And all of a sudden I'm there facing a jury trial with no preparation, and my wife was sick, and I asked for continuance. And you see, that point, it can be argued that I made an offer, an acceptance, and put myself in jurisdiction. But you see, all this time I was under such coercion that I couldn't function any other way. You know, my system was falling apart. I was unsteady on my feet. I was unprepared to go to trial at that moment, and therefore the court granted me a postponement for me to get legal advice, which once you get legal assistance, you put yourself in their jurisdiction, because the attorney is an officer of the court, and at that point you submit to the jurisdiction.
But they didn't even want to go there. I mean, you might have sort of put yourself in contract with the court when you asked for a continuance. But they didn't even want to address that. I mean, that's kind of like the gist of your argument is not entering into contract. So they wouldn't even want to bring that up necessarily.
They don't want to answer questions that they can't answer. You see, that's the point. If people knew how they're being manipulated by their public servants and by their courts, they would be outraged. And the courts could not function the way they are. And it may come to that anyway, but I hope to God it does not, because it'll come violently. As I said earlier, my attempt was to boycott the system by not giving them any of my energy, by not giving them my assent, by not agreeing to anything, and by demanding that they prove. You see, in our court of law, in a constitutional court of law, you're innocent until proven guilty. In an administrative court of law, you're guilty until you prove you're innocent. It's just backwards. Now it happens so gradually that people think it's normal. And our kids today aren't even aware of what it was like when I grew up in the 1950s, when it truly was a different time, a different place in this country. We're about the same age, I think, Bill, and you know what I mean by that.
Oh, I've seen a lot of changes. Definitely, I've seen changes.
Yeah.
I don't want to get off the subject, but one thing that's really I've noticed is the police have definitely become a military unit instead of a police force.
Well, they call themselves paramilitary. So you're right.
That's one thing that I've really noticed.
Yeah.
A big change in the police. But I want to get back to your legal things, because it's interesting that you're walking free. You went to court. Well, they gave you a continuance, and you got back to court.
Well, you see, when they sent me invitations to appear, I did not appear, and so they swore out a warrant for failure to appear.
You mean after you got your continuance?
Yeah.
They said, show up 2 weeks from now.
Okay, I showed up for that appearance, and I then addressed the presiding judge, Gerald Neufeld, also from the spectator section, and he refused to allow me to read a statement, and ultimately he put it off for another continuance. But I had abided by my statement in court when I was released that I would appear at that particular time and date. I did. It was under coercion, but I did nevertheless. And so from that point on, I made no further agreements, and therefore when the invitations to appear, which were not warrants, which were not summonses, with a judge's signature or court seal on it, they were anonymous. There was no name on it. Now, if you're a subject to the administrative court, they don't need a valid warrant. You see, those are the rules you abide by being a subject, and therefore, since I was not bound by an invitation to appear. If I had appeared, that would confer jurisdiction to them, because it was an invitation to appear. It wasn't a command to appear, and I wasn't going to give them that. See, even the going into court would be a submitting to their jurisdiction by appearing when they call upon you. That's been primarily the reasons for the subsequent arrests. When they come after me on failure to appear, it was for that basis. They still could not prove jurisdiction. They would not prove jurisdiction, and they would not address this factor of the defective warrant. You know, it was not a warrant. These are the things that they play with people's lives, and people don't question it.
And if you question it, and your proof, you're walking free.
I'm free. Now, the last time that they arrested me for the same thing, that I refused to appear, which I refused, no question I refused to appear. They didn't have jurisdiction, and they wouldn't prove it. So I wasn't about to give them jurisdiction. They came to my home about 8:30 in the morning, when my wife is on oxygen, and she's seriously ill with COPD, a respiratory illness. She can't do anything. I mean, we have a wood stove. She can't bring the wood in. She's on a oxygen producing machine, which is on a tether, and so she can walk around the house, but that's about it. She's weak. If she goes outside to get some fresh air, on 3 occasions she's fallen down and hasn't been able to get up. Now, fortunately, I was home, and I heard her calls for help, and I went out and I picked her up and brought her in the house. Now, that's the state of her health, or it was at that time. Now, when they came in at 8:30 in the morning, they pretended they were a paving crew. They were in plain clothes, no marked cars, and there were 5 officers, all in plain clothes, work clothes, and there was a pickup truck, a white pickup truck with a ladder, overhang ladders on it, and that was their cover. So they knocked on the door, and my wife was still hooked up to the machine, and so I walked out and I opened the door, and they were asking for directions. They gave me the name of the woman who owns the property that we live on. And so I stepped out of the house to point out where she lived. As soon as I stepped out, they grabbed me.
Cross the threshold, right?
Yeah,
right.
And I did. They wouldn't come into my home, the castle, the sovereignty, etc. So that's what they did, and you know, it's kind of embarrassing, but I had been awakened from bed, and I hadn't urinated yet. And I had to go. Boy. And they cuffed me from behind. They slammed me up against the door, against the side of the house. My wife was a little anxious about that, and it scared the hell out of her. And I'm standing there, you know, I had my pants on, but I really had to go. And they would not let me urinate. And I'm standing there, and ultimately, they allowed me to urinate, and I'm standing there with all these guys around while I'm urinating. You know, talk about an embarrassing position to be put into. Well, ultimately, they took me away, and I asked to see the warrant. They refused to show me a warrant, and they took me away and took me to the jail. Now, my wife, who wasn't able to care for herself, was left alone for 5 days with no help. I was her main caregiver, and they took me away and left her alone, which was very dangerous. Now, that's been a major thing which has caused them, you know, untold embarrassment. What they did to by leaving my wife that condition. They had to save face. So ultimately, they sentenced me to 90 days on that, on a probation violation. Now, when I was sentenced, I refused to accept probation because that also would have given jurisdiction, and I did not. And when I was sentenced, I told them I refused probation, I refused to contract with you, and therefore I assumed that they would put me in jail for the remaining 2 years that they had was part of the sentence, after being convicted. And they let me out the same day. They let me out the same day, you see. And that was prior to the last time they came after me. So when they came after me, they gave me 90 days for violation of probation. On the first day, I told the
and you never consented to
never
probation.
consented to probation. So their terms were moot, unless they could prove jurisdiction, and they could not, and they have not.
And you're walking free.
Well, okay, here's the kicker, Bill. You're going to love this. Now, on the first day of the 22 days of the second hunger strike, altogether I had 2 hunger strikes, one for 33 days and one for 22 days. On the first day of the 22-day hunger strike, I notified the sheriff and the presiding judge, Judge Gerald Neufeld, that I would continue the hunger strike until they either cut me loose with all charges dropped or have the district attorney respond to the 23 proofs of claim of jurisdiction, which he refuses to do, or until death. See, well, on the 22nd day, my health had deteriorated to such a degree that the nurse who handles the jail program felt that I was in danger of kicking off. And they didn't want to be answering questions as to another unexplained death in the county jail. So at about 9 o'clock in the morning, they came to my cell, the nurse and a deputy, and the nurse said, "You're out of here." And I said, "What do you mean, I'm out of here?" He says, "We're going to take you to Three Rivers Hospital. You're going to be admitted. They're going to stabilize you. And when you're stabilized, you're going to be released to go home." This is all of a sudden, they told me this. And I was to be taken over by at 10 o'clock. This is 9 o'clock. So an hour, 10 o'clock rolls around, nothing. It wasn't until 3 o'clock that they came again for me at my cell, and I was to be taken to the hospital. Only this time, the terms had changed. They had gotten a hold of Judge Wolke, Pat Wolke, who had indicated that I would be released on the condition that I do community service. And the community service was that I would take care of my ailing wife. How's that for face saving?
Yeah, they got themselves out of a jam that way, didn't they? Yeah.
Well, they tried like hell. At any rate, go ahead. And
go ahead.
Oh, at any rate, I was taken over to the hospital, by Lieutenant Anderson, who was in charge of the jail, and he dropped me off at the door of the hospital, and he said, "You're on your own. If you want medical assistance, you're going to have to pay for it yourself. We're not responsible for yourself anymore, and you're on your own." I says, "What about the rest of the probation?" He says, "Well, you're on your own. Now we've called the court, and nobody will answer our question as to what's going on with probation. All of a sudden, I'm off probation. There's nothing hanging over me. No 90 days to spend. No 2 years to spend. No nothing. Now, talk about a fiction. Now I'm free."
They make up the rules.
That's right.
They make up the rules. They can break their own rules.
Well,
whatever. They can change their rules.
That's how it sums up at this point. I'm a free man with nothing hanging over me, so what the hell was I being held for in the first place? You understand?
To maintain a fiction.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you, Ray. That's quite a story. We'll probably continue this later.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I look forward to it.
Great.
Thank you for having me, by the way.
All right. Bill Baggins, Mother Earth Radio and the Free Radio Network.